So it's not about forcing these firms. A lot of these firms want to innovate. They want to bring some of the best engineers, some of the best crypto people and analysts in the UK, but they struggle because of the regulatory regime.
Some of those sandboxes already exist.
But they've been done extremely half-heartedly and in an ineffectual way. And so in terms of how much things would cost, look, the reality is, if you look at, there's some Chainalysis report that suggests that actually capital gains tax takings from cryptocurrencies are currently actually pretty negligible in the UK.
It's pretty hard.
We are being left behind by countries all over the world in things like AI, in things like crypto. So what this bill does is, firstly, it makes it illegal for a bank to debank you or restrict services simply for example, connecting a Coinbase account or legally transacting in crypto. It cuts capital gains tax down to 10% on eligible crypto assets. Will create a sovereign Bitcoin reserve fund. So we have a Bank of England sovereign fund that is fit for the future, and will even allow HMRC to accept, will make HMRC accept tax payments in crypto. So we'll make actually paying your taxes frictionless if you choose to use cryptocurrency.
Because there's a lot of infrastructure.
The things we're describing are not going to be a cost on a net basis for our economy and for our firms. They're going to be a big boon for our firms, and they're part of a broader economic package that Nigel will introduce when he's the Prime Minister, that will modernise the British economy, get GDP per capita in this country growing materially again.
Yusuf starts with a hard sell. Britain's financial crown is falling, so reform will restart the city by allowing large companies explore with new tech, fast and loose, inside a 2-year regulatory sandbox. Make sure you like and subscribe.
Because there's a lot of infrastructure involved in all of that. Are you going to basically force the banks to spend money to make this happen? You're going to force HMRC to spend the money to make this happen? Like, how does that actually, in reality? Because this is great. It sounds very interesting, but you're at the point now in terms of your polling numbers where you need to actually be able to justify, quantify how this is going to work and how much it's actually going to cost. So how much would it cost to do all of that? How much would it cost to change the infrastructure for the UK economy to make that work?
Well, this is all going to be significantly beneficial for the UK economy. One of the things I didn't mention there, which is also really important for people watching this show, is that we're going to create a 2-year regulatory sandbox for large firms, especially in the City of London, so that they can catapult themselves into a leading position. So it's not about forcing these firms. A lot of these firms want to innovate. They want to bring some of the best engineers, some of the best crypto people and analysts in the UK, but they struggle because of the regulatory regime.
Some of those sandboxes already exist.
But they've been done extremely half-heartedly and in an ineffectual way. And so in terms of how much things would cost, look, the reality is, if you look at, there's some Chainalysis report that suggests that actually capital gains tax takings from cryptocurrencies are currently actually pretty negligible in the UK.
It's pretty hard.
Partly because a lot of it is still done offshore. Number two, compliance is very low. And again, this is what we're going to be all about. We're going to reduce the tax rate and we will increase the amount of money coming into the exchequer, which, by the way, if you just look at what's just happened with Rachel Reeves' increase, is just in the news, I think, this morning in the Telegraph. Rachel Reeves increased capital gains in this country across the board. And what's happening, we're seeing absolute takings for the Treasury come down. So
Guy Johnson does traditional show me the money reporting. Yusuf maintains, full stop, reduced taxes equate to more income.
It's working very well in the States that you push crypto. That seems to resonate quite strongly. Is that what Nigel is talking about, what he was talking about in Las Vegas with this crypto bill, let's call it, that he would like to put in front of the House?
Well, firstly, we make no apology for listening to young people in this country, which, frankly, the old parties haven't done in decades. Nigel's been very clear that we also need to modernise the British economy and lean into this country's strength.
For Gen Z, is this simply MAGA marketing? Yusuf turns the charge. Listening to young people is not opportunistic. It is really overdue. Make sure you like and subscribe.
Nowhere in this bill, though, mentions things like fraud protection, consumer protection. Comparing that to some of the states and some of the measures over in the U.S., there are those elements of it that make it easier to adopt on both sides of the aisle. What's your answer to that? Where's the consumer protection element?
Well, at the moment, there is already significant consumer protection legislation, and that obviously comes through in other legislation. So what we need to do is make sure what this bill, first of all, it's not a completely comprehensive crypto program, right? It's setting out, it's a statement of intent, and these will be among the first things that Nigel will do as Prime Minister. In terms of needing, quote, both sides of the aisle, our goal, and we're already polling in a position where we would have a reform majority of MPs. Look,
Kriti Gupta works on consumer protection, the weak spot. Yusuf said the law already addresses frauds. The measure is only phase 1.
OK, but at the moment we have our wealth in pounds, and that's our sovereign currency, and that allows us to do lots of things that others can't do within the European Union, for instance, within the Eurozone. Aren't you talking about undermining British sovereignty? Aren't you if we're focused on Bitcoin, that's not our currency. Our currency is the British pound. You're a party that has talked a lot about sovereignty. Aren't you undermining sovereignty, the sovereignty of the UK, by undermining its currency by talking so much about crypto?
No, actually the opposite. I mean, if we talk about sovereignty and individual sovereignty, our leader Nigel...
National sovereignty.
Well, even national sovereignty. One of the... Look, remember, the bill is not just about Bitcoin, by the way, just to be clear. It's blockchain and crypto assets. The regulatory sandbox we're talking about will allow stable coins. We want to innovate.
People are talking about a Bitcoin. Would that be something that you...
Not if it's essentially not if it's a government-sanctioned coin that ends up being the sort of thing that takes us down to...
a government-sanctioned...
Johnson launches a sovereignty missile. Does Bitcoin devaluate the pound? Actually, Yusuf claims cryptocurrencies protect people from political persecution by banks.
Talk to us back to the Bitcoin Reserve Fund that you talked about. What kind of size are we looking at here? How large might that be?
Well, hopefully it becomes very big as Bitcoin appreciates over time. I mean, one of the interesting... Well, we're not going to put a number on it now, and the reason for that is because, look, everything we're doing is taking us in a direction so that, when Nigel wins, which is obviously what we're working on, we hope that reform will become the new natural party of government, which is a moniker that had been previously placed on the Tory party, which I think are now polling fourth in many polls.
Who absorbs the price volatility? If Bitcoin crashes overnight, which happens quite often, who absorbs that? The taxpayers? The Bitcoin Reserve Fund?
Well, the whole point of the reserve fund is asset prices can go up and down. But we have a view, Nigel has a view, that in the long run, Bitcoin is going to appreciate. And so far, by the way, as much as it's been volatile, like many assets, by the way, we're not far off all-time highs at the moment with Bitcoin. But look, of course, we're going to be prudent in the way that we manage the public finances. We think, by the way, in the long run, if we don't do this, if we don't have Bitcoin in the sovereign fund in 30, 40 years' time, the country will be far poorer than it would otherwise be. Well, the whole point of the reserve fund is asset prices can go up and down. But we have a view, Nigel has a view, that in the long run, Bitcoin is going to appreciate. And so far, by the way, as much as it's been volatile, like many assets, by the way, we're not far off all-time highs at the moment with Bitcoin. But look, of course, we're going to be prudent in the way that we manage the public finances. We think, by the way, in the long run, if we don't do this, if we don't have Bitcoin in the sovereign fund in 30, 40 years' time, the country will be far poorer than it would otherwise be.
How significant? And who absorbs the losses? Yusuf creates the fund with seized crime coins and crypto tax and hopes long-term appreciation outweighs short-term volatility.
Let's bring it right back to the crypto story. You've unleashed a series of measures there that you're looking at. Talk to us back to the Bitcoin Reserve Fund that you talked about. What kind of size are we looking at here? How large might that be?
Well, hopefully it becomes very big as Bitcoin appreciates over time. I mean, one of the interesting... Well, we're not going to put a number on it now, and the reason for that is because, look, everything we're doing is taking us in a direction so that, when Nigel wins, which is obviously what we're working on.
Yusuf tells Westminster it is sleeping while Abu Dhabi and Dubai are blazing forward in fintech.
Can I just talk broadly about where you are? You are a left-wing economic policy and a right-wing social policy party. Ultimately, how do you resolve that tension? Is that a tension that you think you can take into power? Is that a tension that you think is resolvable? Are you a big tent party now that allows all those ideas to exist within your kind of ideological framework?
I think all of these labels are decreasingly useful in the world that we live in today for a few reasons. Number one, the same party, the Tory party, that I say, is now polling fourth. They were the ones who talked about fiscal conservatism and living within your means. They took the national debt from $1 trillion to $2.8 trillion inside 14 years and took state spending as a percentage of GDP up to Soviet Union levels at one point in those 14 years.
Johnson seeks to pin reform as lefty-con right sock. Yusuf claims labels disappeared when Tories doubled the debt.
Not if it's not if it's a government-sanctioned coin that ends up being the sort of thing that takes us down to...
The government-sanctioned means...
We're in a situation where our leader, Nigel Farage, was probably involved in the most high-profile debanking scandal. Most people watching this will know this, because of his political views. Not only are we not going to succeed, we are getting left for dead by countries in the Middle East. I mean, look what just happened. Trump went out to the Middle East. Go and look what Abu Dhabi are doing. Go and look at what Dubai is doing. I don't think people in this country realise the speed at which the UK is falling behind. And that's why we need someone like Nigel who's going to say, no, we're going to lean into Britain's strengths. We have some of the best AI talent in this country. We have brilliant energy scientists. You know, we have the most expensive energy costs in the world, astonishingly, despite actually being a pretty resource-rich country and being home to Rolls-Royce, who have, I think, the best product in small modular reactors, which Nigel will proliferate through the country to get energy costs.
Exhibit A is Nigel Farage's own banking scandal, crypto as personal freedom insurance.
How does that actually, in reality?
If we make it effortless to pay your taxes in crypto, then that money can go into the reserve as well. But if you actually look at the way Bitcoin has been trading now, it's been really interesting. It's trading much more closely to gold, for example, than it is with tech stocks or other things. So we are seeing something very interesting that is happening. And I think over the course of the next few years and the next decade and the next 2 or 3 decades, which is really ultimately, you should measure the success of a sovereign fund over the course of decades, I don't see any reason why it can't end up being, a pretty meaningful chunk of Britain's wealth.
Johnson goes back. Numbers, manufacturers, employees. Yusuf parries. If Britain avoids risk, it will be in the 1970s stagnation. Reform will risk, innovate, and win. Let me know what you think down below in the comments.